Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. We have a terrific show for you today. Very much honored to have Donna Shalala with us. Donna Shalala has had an enviable career. For 8 years, she was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Health and Human Services and became the nation's longest-serving HHS secretary. In 2019, she was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from Florida's 27th Congressional District. Donna has spent the better part of her life, and especially the past 2 decades, in higher education, both as president of Hunter College and then as the highly successful president of the University of Wisconsin, followed by the University of Miami. In August 2023, she took on the role of interim president of the New School here in New York, and today she honors us with her presence. We're pleased to welcome Donna Shalala to the program. Wow, what a resume.
Thank you, Jim. My resume is longer than any speech I've ever made.
Well, I don't know about that, but you've been a minister of state, a legislator. You've led 3 major educational institutions. But you started here at CUNY.
I did.
You taught political science at Baruch. Now, how long ago was that, and what are your recollections of what happened?
Well, it was the 1970s, and I can't say I was happy at Baruch because the chairman of the political science department at the time said to me right after I arrived that they had never tenured a woman and had no intention of ever tenuring a woman. And then after a year, he said to me, you're sort of embarrassing all of us because you're publishing more than all of us put together. So I went to the dean. I remember going to the dean. He reassured me that I could get tenure. And I pointed out to him that the department had to vote on tenure, and a dean or a president overruling was a very difficult situation. So I went off to Columbia. And then eventually, after a few years in the Carter administration, I came to be president of Hunter, but it was still very early in my career. I was still in my 30s. I loved Hunter. What an extraordinary institution it was. And I spent 7, 8 years there before I went on to Wisconsin.
Well, you've been living here now in Florida, except for the stint at the New School, but really your roots are here in New York, aren't they? Haven't you spent a lot of time in New York?
Well, I've spent more than 15 years in New York. So in many ways, I'm a New Yorker, but I'm a transplanted Floridian now, and my residency is really in Florida, and I've been there for 20 years.
Well, many New Yorkers have transplanted their residency to Florida, so it's certainly a nice place to live. But we'll accept you as a New Yorker.
Well, I'm making the reverse commute. I told the governor that I was one of the few people that is coming up from Florida to New York, at least for some period of time.
Well, that's like wrong way Corrigan. So, Donna, tell us about your interest in higher education. How did you become involved in it, and why did you decide to concentrate there rather than somewhere else?
Well, it wasn't by design. I followed my boyfriend to graduate school at Syracuse. He hated it and left, and I loved it and stuck around. But I really wanted to be a journalist. I had worked.
Journalist, my gosh.
Yeah, I had worked at the Cleveland Press. So when I finished my PhD, I wrote to the New York Times and to the Washington Post, and they both said the same thing: go back to the Cleveland Press. And I really didn't want to go back to Cleveland, which was my hometown. And my major professor said, you know, you're really a pretty good academic. Where do you want to live? And I said, New York. And he said, okay, we'll help you find a job in New York.
Thankfully, attitudes toward women on the tenure track have changed.
Dramatically. In fact, there was a huge settlement at CUNY, as you probably know. And I actually got some money since I was one of the expert witnesses in that case. But I gave the money to the CUNY Women's Studies program. I was president of Hunter at the time, and I thought, when I got this check, I really shouldn't keep this money. So I gave it to the CUNY Women's program.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about Wisconsin. You were the first woman to lead a Big Ten university. That's quite an accomplishment.
Well,
and it was early.
It was very early. There's no question that those big Midwestern and Western universities are extraordinary research universities. They've got agricultural colleges, they've got world-class science. I would probably still be at Wisconsin if Bill Clinton hadn't twisted my arm. It was a wonderful opportunity for me. I loved teaching there. I loved leading the university. It was complex, but it was clearly world-class.
Well, even there, you were way out in front of an issue that continues to dog us today, and that's free speech on campus.
Yeah.
And particularly with regard to hate speech. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Well, we tried to figure out a way in which we could have a student code of conduct that covered hate speech. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court said that hate speech, for the most part, was covered by the Constitution. So there wasn't, we still haven't figured out a way to deal with hate speech. I mean, you can, there's a narrower way that you can do it if someone yells fire and people get hurt or something like that. But
fire in a theater, I think.
Fire in a theater, exactly.
Now you're talking my language.
Yeah. But, you know, we were trying to find a way to get civility, more civility. And it wasn't just about anti-Semitism, it was really about racism as well. And the great lawyers at the University of Wisconsin Law School thought there might have been a way to do it. It turned out that there was not. And I'm a free speech person. I mean, there's no question about that. Unless there's a narrow way in which hate speech, which literally changes behavior. It's really a kind of harassment and bullying when it's used that way. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to do it under the law. But civility on campus, tolerance for different points of view, that's what we have to continue to work on in higher education.
Well, in Canada, hate speech is illegal. And in Germany, hate speech is illegal.
Our Constitution is pretty strong about the freedom of expression.
Freedom for ideas we hate. So what you may think is hate speech might be something I don't hate so much.
Exactly.
Now, we have this controversy about college administrations inviting speakers to campus. And do you think they should try to regulate which speakers come, and then giving regard to the problems of security and if they bring in controversial speakers?
I don't. I've never had a speaker interrupted. I've had controversial speakers on campus, but we've always been able to negotiate with both sides about behavior in relation to that speaker. It takes a lot of delicate negotiations, but also it's a teachable moment for the students, and I think it's very important. I did institute at Hunter the Farrakhan rule, and that is Minister Farrakhan, who is anti-Semitic and let alone all the other things that he is, when he comes on a campus, he doesn't want to take questions. So the Farrakhan rule is no one gets to campus unless they're prepared to take questions from the students in particular. And that was the only way I could keep Minister Farrakhan off of any campus that I've been on.
Now, when you were at Wisconsin, and about when was this?
Oh, I was at Wisconsin from 1987 to 1993.
Okay, so when you were at Wisconsin, a federal judge said that your speech code was unconstitutional.
Yes.
So did that change your behavior in any way, or your attitude?
No, it didn't. It didn't. It just meant that we had to work harder on campus. But I literally have never had a speaker that had to walk off the stage because they were interrupted. But you have to work very hard at that. And in this atmosphere, with this kind of polarization, it obviously is 10 times as hard as it ever has been. But you have to have a lot of help from the faculty. This is not about the administration. This is really about faculty members and what role they want to play in really helping to navigate and to teach the students that it's important that they listen to different points of view, things that they may not believe that they're interested in. And there are other informal ways of bringing different groups together.
Okay, so Bill Clinton comes along, twists your arm, says you don't have to worry about hate speech anymore. Come into my cabinet. Then what happened?
Well, I did get confirmed very easily. The day after Bill Clinton was sworn in, I got confirmed. So it wasn't, we didn't have the kind of polarization. I got lots of Republican votes, all except one, I think, during that time. So it was a pretty smooth entry into government. Now, I had been in government before. I had worked with state government when I was part of the Big Mac group that saved New York City in 1975. I was in the Carter administration as Assistant Secretary for HUD. So I sort of knew how government agencies were organized, but I found it easy because I had run a big research university. There's nothing much difference when you conceptualize how you run a big government agency. I had the CDC and the FDA and Social Security and all these big, and the National Institutes of Health, and they had strong leaders, just like having a bunch of deans who think they run the world. And it was a matter of getting them to work together as a team.
Well, Bill Clinton, for the first 2 years of his presidency, had a Democratic Congress.
We did.
And then for the rest of his presidency, which was the next 6 years, it was a Republican Congress. And that must have created a problem for you.
Well, it meant that you had to do everything in a bipartisan way. And his instinct was to do everything in a bipartisan way. He had worked with Republicans before as a governor, and he had a pretty good working relationship with Republicans. They were willing to do certain kinds of things. We doubled the NIH budget, for example. We reformed welfare. I mean, we did a whole bunch of things. We extended child care. We added health care to Head Start. I mean, we reformed the Medicare program. So there were a number of things that we were able to get through. I had a good relationship with Republicans. I played tennis with the chair of the Appropriations Committee, the senator from Alaska, and
Newt Gingrich?
No, but I had a decent relationship with Newt.
Newt Gingrich.
But just a working relationship with him. But I knew a number of the Republicans, and my view was that I was confirmed by Republicans and Democrats, and that I could work with both of them.
Now, the welfare bill was a compromise, wasn't it?
It was a compromise, not a compromise I loved, but Bill Clinton assured me that we could make some changes second term, so I stuck around second term. We did indeed modify it and make some changes.
Wasn't there a rider, no sex education in the schools?
There were always riders related to sex education. There were always people that wanted us only to do abstinence. But we could overcome some of that because education is a local function. And it was really up to local governments on what curriculum they wanted, what the school boards wanted for their schools.
Hard to legislate abstinence anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I had worked with some really interesting programs at Hunter on sex education, getting kids not to get pregnant or not to get someone pregnant. We actually gave a generation of students and their parents who didn't get pregnant or didn't get someone pregnant free tuition to Hunter.
And then, of course, you had legislation about, I know there was legislation about the abortion pill, the mifestosterone.
Yes, but it wasn't legislation. The FDA approved it, and it's an interesting story because the French company called my department, offered to give us the license for mifepristone directly to the government. I thought that was a bad idea because it would get political. So we arranged for them to give it to the population council, and a number of people, including Warren Buffett, underwrote the clinical trials. It was going to come back to us, to FDA, and I built a wall, I remember, around FDA and said, do not take any phone calls from the Congress, do not take any phone calls from the White House, just do your scientific job. And the commissioner at that time of the FDA, Jane Haney, Dr. Jane Haney, really did follow that dictum, and it was totally kept out of politics. It was approved in 2000, if I remember correctly. It had been used in Europe extensively for a number of years. The French
Isn't
company
it used in conjunction with another drug?
Yes, but the French company did not want to touch it. Their leadership was Catholic and they wanted nothing to do with it. They had enough problems with the French government that insisted they make it available. And that's why they gave the United States, wanted to give us the license free. I didn't know anything about French politics. And I was trying to figure out why they wanted to give it to us free. So I called the only person I knew about French politics, Felix Rohatyn, the great leader of Lazare Frere, who had been the chairman of Big Mac, and I had known him forever. And I called Felix up, and he explained to me that they were all Catholic. They were close to the Cardinal of Paris and close to the Pope, and they just wanted to get rid of it. Once I knew that, then I knew that we had to keep it out of politics, at least out of government politics, and protect our right to approve it or not to approve it through the FDA process. And that's when the license went directly to the Population Council.
So it was good advice, and Felix went on to become ambassador to France.
He did. And everybody laughs when I tell them that story about the idea of Felix being involved in abortion politics. Not really, but he taught me enough about what was going on in France so that we could make a decision on whether or not we were going to take the license.
Now, the controversy over it persists to this day because
it's ridiculous.
It's been used effectively and safely for over 2 decades.
It's safer than Tylenol.
Safer than Tylenol.
Safer than Tylenol, and frankly, it's been reviewed 6 or 7 times. Every time a Congress asks for a review, the FDA or outside scientific groups do a review. It is a very safe couple of drugs that are used, and half of the abortions now in this country are done medically.
Done medically without surgery.
Without surgery.
Without an invasive procedure.
Exactly.
Now, it only works, though, for roughly the first trimester, isn't that right?
No, a little bit more than the first trimester.
A little more than the first trimester.
A little more than the first trimester. I'm not a doctor, so, but it's been approved over and over again. I mean, there's no controversy from that point of view. From the point of view of the anti-abortion forces, of course, they've brought a court case in this regard, but it's a very safe drug. The court case is going to the Supreme Court. I mean, they're going to hear.
It's already there. They said that it's legal for the time being, but they're going to review it.
They're going to review it. But for them to overturn a decision, a scientific decision by the FDA would be an unbelievable precedent that the courts could interfere in an FDA decision puts every drug at risk. And I think that every pharmaceutical company is shaking in their boots at the idea of a court being able to intervene in a scientific decision about safety.
But I always thought that overruling Roe v. Wade was an unbelievable precedent.
Well, it was. There's no question about that.
And but
Roe v. Wade was not approved by the FDA. This is the case of the great scientific agency that protects all of us and protects the drugs that we take being overruled by the courts.
But they've raised questions about deference to the administrative agencies, so who knows what they're going to do. It's a very conservative court.
It's a conservative court, but in this area, they better be very careful.
Well, I'm sure they want to be careful. They just adopted a code of ethics for themselves, which they haven't had in the past.
Which is very similar to their own internal rules.
Now, what goes into a good HHS secretary? You've served longer than anyone else in history.
I think experience in management helps. A relationship with the president helps a lot. It's hard to be a cabinet secretary if you don't have a previous relationship with the president. I've seen cabinet secretaries really when they don't have a relationship with the president, which means they can't walk into his office, they can't pick up the phone and get an answer, they don't have a regular dialogue to the president, that helps. I have known the Clintons since before they were married, literally. And I've known Hillary, of course. The two of us served on the Children's Defense Fund for 15 years, going back and forth when Bill was running for office. So I had known them for a long time. He did not pick, with one single exception, everybody that he picked for his cabinet he knew. The single exception was Janet Reno, who Hillary knew, apparently. But he did not have a previous relationship with her the way he did with all of us. In fact, when we sat down around the cabinet table the first time, most of the people I knew from the Carter administration. They were prominent Democrat in the Carter administration. So it was not a new crowd. Ron Brown from New York, Henry Cisneros from Texas, Alexis Herman had been in the Department of Labor. I mean, I knew these people previously, and he knew everybody.
So it was a collegial cabinet.
It was a very collegial cabinet.
So when you had cabinet meetings, did you get into other areas or just discussion about the areas?
Whatever the agenda he wanted, he would consult. But the cabinet members met in different configurations too when we were working on an issue, like Social Security, where it was in fact the Treasury Department that played a role.
Okay, so having served with such distinction in the executive branch, why'd you want to run for Congress?
You know, it was an empty seat.
Just because it was an empty seat?
No, it was an empty seat, and someone did a poll and figured out I was the only one that could get the seat because it had been in the Republican hands for so long. So I thought, what the heck? I've been in every other level of government.
At this point, you're president of the University of Miami.
I had stepped down from president
down.
Of the University of Miami. And I thought it would be interesting, and I had the beach. The second time I ran, you know, they've redrawn the lines.
Beach is Miami Beach.
Miami Beach, which is very democratic.
Quasi-Floridians, yes.
Yeah, it's very democratic. So I won the first time.
They gerrymandered the beach away from your district.
Yep.
That wasn't very nice of them.
It wasn't very nice at all, since it was a lot of my money.
You only lost the second time by a very narrow margin.
Very narrow, under 2%.
Well, you didn't claim it was a fake election?
No, it wasn't a fake election. Without the beach.
Gerrymandered out.
Without the beach, I could never win that district.
Okay, so what was Congress like when you were serving there? Was it as
fun.
Bad as it is now?
No, yeah, well, you know, it was very polarized.
It was polarized, but did people work across the aisle?
Yes.
And
avoiding some of the most controversial issues, you could work across the aisle.
And did you have friends among the extremists?
Yes, I actually did. I actually did.
What's it like to go out to lunch with an extremist?
Well, you don't talk about the extremes.
Right.
When you go out. Yeah, I had some friends. I knew most of the senior people, but I made friends with people in my own class. And I knew them. And, you know, I worked on health issues. So the Docs Caucus in Congress is mostly Republican doctors. On social policy, we were far apart. But on healthcare policy, on medical policy, we could work together on things like surprise billing, for example. So if you go ask any of those docs whether they miss me, they'll say absolutely, because she's the only one that, you know, really understood a lot of our issues. We have a couple of doctors on the Republican side, but there were a lot more on, we have a couple on the Democratic side, but there were a lot more on the Republican side. So we could work together. We picked out some issues where we could work together, and we got some of those passed, like surprise billing, eliminating the chance that people would get a surprise because their insurance didn't cover.
Insurance didn't cover. So all the roles you've assumed, from CUNY to Big Mac to leader of 3 major universities and winding up in the president's cabinet and the halls of Congress, which one did you like best?
None of those. It was being a Peace Corps volunteer.
A Peace Corps volunteer.
At the beginning of my career, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Iran. in a mud village in southern Iran working on a small agricultural college. That was the most fun. I learned the most from that. That was my favorite job of all time. So it was the beginning of my career, not the middle, not the end.
Okay, so Donna Shalala has just been marvelous, and we've unfortunately come to the end. It was just like a tale that was told. But I have a question for you. What is Donna Shalala going to do next?
I have no idea. I ask only one question. Is this an adventure? That's the only question I've ever asked about any position, and I've never done the same thing twice.
Is it an adventure at the new school?
It is. It is. It's an extraordinary place.
Do you plan to stay on beyond the year?
No. It's a year's job, and they're searching for a permanent president.
And then it's back to Florida.
And then it's back to Florida.
Well, this has just been wonderful. And thank you so much for coming by.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Meanwhile, take care, be well, and all the best.